Did you know that rugby and football were the same sport in the past? Let me explain. Rugby's origin can actually be traced back over 2,000 years to the Roman game of arpastum, derived from the Greek word sais, which involved handling a ball. That being said, various forms of football games with ball handling were played around the world. Different regions had their own variations, including New Zealand's Kio Rahi, Australia's Marngrook, Central Italy's Calcio Fiorentino, and Japan's Kemari, among many others. Like I explained in the football episode, this sport was played everywhere, and rules kept changing a lot before the first football clubs organized in England to create a set of rules. Around 1845, the Rugby School, which gave the name of the sport, established the first rules of the game, thus separating fully football and rugby. By the end of the 19th century, a myth was created to explain the origins of the game. It was said that William Webb Ellis, a student at the Rugby School, was the inventor of the game. But while it is known, and there's records of this, that Webb Ellis was a student at the school at that time, there is no direct evidence of the actual events taking place. The rapid spread of rugby union throughout many parts of the British Empire led to the establishment of International Rugby Football Board in 1886, which is now called the International Rugby Board, IRB. The highest level of international competitions for rugby union teams is the IRB Rugby World Cup, played for the William Webb Ellis Trophy. The World Cup has been held at a regular 4-year intervals since 1987. In rugby league, major competitions are held in England and Australia, and the pinnacle of the game has been international tours involving Australian and British national teams, along with the Rugby League World Cup, which began in 1954 in France and has been held at irregular intervals since then. As you may understand by now, women were not necessarily the targeted audience for this sport since it originated in a boys' school. Playing rugby became synonymous with learning to be a man in public schools of England and private schools in the settler societies of the British Empire. There was a short-lived attempt to establish Women's Rugby League in Sydney in the early 1920s, but for the most part, as in football actually, women were not allowed to play and were actively discouraged. And just like in football, it was more in the US and Canada that women's rugby gained popularity in the 1980s, specifically on college campuses. In 1983, the Women's Rugby Football Union formed in England with 12 member clubs, and by 2000, there were more than 120 clubs. The Women's World Cup began in 1991 and is held every 4 years, while the United States was an early powerhouse, winning in 1991. By the late 1990s, women's international rugby was dominated by New Zealand national team known as the Black Ferns. And just like football, every continent has a tournament and there's many different international competitions, such as the Rugby World Cup Sevens, which is played every 4 years, and alongside the men's version since 2009, or the World Rugby SVNS, which is a series of international sevens tournaments for women's national teams run by World Rugby. Teams compete for the title by accumulating points based on their finishing position in each tournament. So it's very close to how football works. In terms of athletes, I'm not gonna lie, I had a hard time choosing who to talk about because there's so many of them. But here we go. Noriko Kishida is a former Japanese rugby player who started playing when she was 37. Yeah, you heard correctly, 37 years old. In Japan in the 1980s, the women's game emerged because actually many mothers decided to play rugby after seeing the fun their sons were having. And Noriko Kishida was one of those mothers. So along with a group of friends, she formed the Liberty Fields WRFC in 1989. The team that would provide 15 players for the Japanese squad in South Wales. She was also a founding member of the Japan Women's Rugby Football Union. She later became the head coach of Japan's national team. Maggie Alfonsi is a former rugby player for England. She is best known for winning the Rugby World Cup in 2014, but she has other achievements to her name. She was a part of the squad who won the Women's Six Nations 7 times in a row, 6 of which were Grand Slam victories. In 2011, she also won the Pat Marshall Award from the Rugby Union Writers Club, becoming the first woman to do so in the club's 50-year history. She was Sunday Times Sportswoman of the Year in 2010 and was inducted into the World Rugby Hall of Fame in November 2016. Farah Palmer is a former player for New Zealand. She's the most successful captain in Rugby World Cup history, having led the Black Ferns to a three-peat of titles between 1998 to 2006. Between 1997 and her retirement in 2006, New Zealand lost only one match, making her the country's greatest ever female skipper. Palmer was inducted into the World Rugby Hall of Fame in 2014. She was so good that they named a tournament after her. In recognition of her contribution to the game in 2016, New Zealand Rugby renamed its Women's Provincial Championship as the Farah Palmer Cup. Also in 2016, in December, Palmer became the first female member of the New Zealand Rugby Board, having been elected as its Maori representative. Ruby Tui is a New Zealand Rugby Union player. She competed internationally when the National Rugby Sevens team won the silver medal at the 2016 Summer Olympics tournament. And she won again at the Summer Olympics in Tokyo in 2021, but this time it was a gold medal. And she also won the 2021 Rugby World Cup. She was actually awarded in 2019 World Rugby Women's 7 Player of the Year and in 2022 World Rugby Women's 15's Breakthrough Player of the Year and World Rugby Women 15's Dream Team of the Year. Emily Skara is a rugby player for England and is the women's side top point scorer and continues to add to her tally. She won the Rugby Cup in 2014 and has amassed over 100 caps for her country. Scarratt has won 8 Women's Six Nation titles, the World Rugby's Women Player of the Year in 2019, and was named Women's Six Nations Players of the Tournament in 2020. But Sarah Hunter is the most capped player in England of all time. She has 141 caps to her name, and in her career that spanned from 2007 to 2023. Hunter won the Rugby World Cup in 2014, claimed 10 Women's Six Nations title with 8 Grand Slams, and was captain for the last 8 years of her England career. She was named World Rugby Player of the Year in 2016, received an MBE in 2015 and a CBE in 2023. Finally, I would like to mention Portia Woodman-Wycliffe because she is a huge name in both the sevens and the 15s games. She is a player for New Zealand and she was named the World Rugby Sevens Player of the Decade. She has also won Olympic and Commonwealth golds in the game. In the 15s, she has won back-to-back Rugby World Cup titles in 2017 and 2021, and she is also the all-time top Rugby World Cup try scorer across men and women's game. She has scored 20 Rugby World Cup tries in the 2 tournaments she has competed in, and she has also been named World Rugby Women's Player of the Year twice in 2015 and 2017. I mentioned earlier in the episode 7s and 15s, also called Rugby Sevens and Union Rugby. In Union Rugby, there are 15 players on the pitch, hence why the 15s name, and 8 substitutes for each team. A rugby game is 80 minutes long, broke into 2 halves of 40 minutes with a 15-minute halftime break. Sevens is a variant of rugby union in which teams are made up of, you guessed it, 7 players and there's 5 substitutes for each team. They play 7 minutes, halves, and 2-minute halftime breaks. The shorter match length actually allows 7 tournaments to be completed in a day or a weekend. The team with the ball must move the ball up the field, but the ball can never be passed forwards, and that's the tricky part of rugby. When the ball is being carried in hand, it can only be thrown or handed off backwards. This is because in rugby, it is the progress of the player and not the ball that is decisive. The players can also kick the ball forward to chase it down. The opposing team needs to stop the attacking team by tackling or trying to retain the ball. Both games are played exactly on the same pitch, which is 100 meters long and 70 meters wide. On each goal line, there is an H-shaped goal. In addition to the goal lines, you have 22 meters line from each goal. Then you have the middle line that splits the field in 2. And from that middle, there's 10 meters line that run parallel of that one. And there are also 2 lines that run the length of the field, 5 meters from touchline. Now, in the 15s, there's so many players that it can be difficult at first to understand their position. Basically, half of them are forwards and the other half are backs. They all have different names, but I'm not going to go into detail here. So the forward's main job is to win the possession of the ball and establish control of the game. The backs are then responsible for making use of the possession and territory the forward secure, meaning they enjoy a greater proportion of scoring opportunities, I would say. This split is similar to the offense and defense in American football, although the forwards and backs remain on the pitch simultaneously throughout the game. Although the rules vary here and there between the 2 games, they are very similar. There are 2 basic ways of scoring rugby: touching the ball down in the goal area, it's called a try, or kicking the ball between the goalposts. A try is worth 5 points, And after a try, a team can attempt to win 2 extra points by kicking the ball in between the goalposts. It's called a conversion. Penalty tries are worth 7 points. This usually happens when the referee deems that a penalty by the opposing team prevents what would likely have otherwise been a successful try. And a penalty goal is a kick at goal that can be attempted after a penalty by the opposing team and is worth 3 points. And that's more or less all for today. If you found this content interesting and you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe to my channel. It's really helpful. And if you are on any podcast platform, feel free to share this episode with your friends and your family. Now that you know more about rugby, let's keep learning with the Athlete's Voices.